And now is the time in our service where we move into our time of meditation together today. So I invite you now to just allow your body to relax. Just plant your feet firmly on the floor and just allow your shoulders to just soften and your facial muscles to just soften and just begin to relax. Just let yourself breathe naturally, no trying to control it. Just allow whatever's natural for you with the breath. And today I invite you, I ask you to allow yourself to be open and to allow yourself to be willing. Allow yourself to be open and willing to remove any obstacles that might be in your path that are preventing you from experiencing the joy of life. Maybe if you're feeling any resistance at that thought, to maybe ask yourself why you're feeling that resistance. And just to allow that resistance to go, if even only for a moment here today. And one of the ways in which we can begin to remove some of those obstacles to joy is to focus on those things in life that we're grateful for. Those things that move us into that place of gratitude. Because where there is gratitude, there's no room for anything but joy. And we'll find that those obstacles that prevent us from feeling joy begin to dissolve. So today I invite you to think about, either visualize or feel whatever it is that brings you joy or gratitude. Think about those things that you're grateful for. Maybe it's one thing, maybe it's several things. But allow those things to enter into your mind at this moment. Just visualize it right there standing in front of you, or if it's small enough, maybe even holding it in your hand. Now I ask you to visualize, if it's a person or an animal, visualize yourself just hugging it close to your body, just holding it up against your heart space. Or if it's something small enough for you to hold, bringing your hand up to your heart space. Allowing yourself to feel the happiness and the gratitude that this person, this being, or this object brings into your life. Continue to feel it as it moves from beyond your heart space throughout the rest of your body, into your shoulders and your abdomen and your legs and your feet, through your arms and up into your head, filling your crown chakra, just full of light and love and gratitude. I invite you to hold that image and that feeling as we move into our moment of silence today, just allowing that gratitude to fill every cell of your body until you feel as if you just almost can't contain it. Just hold that feeling as we move into our time together of silence. And as we begin to bring our focus back to this room and this time and this place, I ask you to take this feeling with you, or this visualization with you. And any time you begin to experience what feels like an obstacle to your joy, go back to this. Go back to this moment of gratitude. Knowing that joy is found in that gratitude. And that joy is always yours, because that joy is a part of who you really are. That joy that is always there, waiting for you to take it. And I invite you right now, either silently or out loud, to just say yes to joy. Yes. Yes. And yes. And so we allow it to be. Namaste. I don't think there's any reason for me to give a talk this morning, because that's too tough of an act for me to follow, so forget it. Joe has done my work for me this morning. No, thank you, Joe. All right. I think I know or have at least met everybody briefly, even in the room, but if I haven't, I'm Reverend Evin Wilkins, and for anybody online who's tuning in for the first time, I'm Reverend Evin, and we're happy to have everybody here this morning because why? We're studying the book of joy, so we've got to have joy in the room, right? All right. Let's give a hand for joy. Come on. Okay. So this is week 3 of our book study, which is the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, and author Douglas Abrams. And if this is your first time joining us, it doesn't matter that you haven't been here the first 2 weeks. The good thing about this study is that you can join in anytime, so don't feel like you're left out. But the reading this week, it starts off with a really interesting twist. And I say that because it's almost like we get a seat at the table, the lunch table of the Archbishop and His Holiness as they're having this conversation together, or some of their wonderful conversations. And of course, during this time when they're sitting together at lunch, they bring up many subjects that are, of course, centered around joy. But of course, we can't do all of them today because I don't want to keep you here till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had to just grab a couple of them and focus on those. But the first one that really caught my attention is because I think it's so very much needed right here and right now today. I mean, let's be honest, everything in the book is. But this is the one thing that I was like, okay, this is something we really need, that is really needed right now today. And this is where they discuss different traditions and how those different traditions are needed. So needed today. And I'm talking spiritual traditions, religious traditions, and how those are needed. So, of course, when they mention traditions, they're talking about religious and spiritual paths and belief systems. But I remember growing up and about how my church taught that our belief system was the only right belief system, that it was the only right way to believe. Either you believed or else. There was just there was no room for interpretation. And I could never buy that because to me, I would look around the world and see people that didn't go to my church or didn't necessarily believe the same, but they were good moral people. And they did so much good for other people. You know, why would a God choose to favor only those who went to my church? You know, or only those who believed in the exact same way that I believed? It just never seemed to measure up to me. And as I got older, I veered from that path and from that church. But due to that, I also became the victim of some Bible abuse due to veering away from that. So much so that I vowed to myself when I was old enough that I would never step foot in another church again. And we see how that turned out. It did not happen, but we do see this happening a lot, though. You know, people are treated cruelly by churches or are marginalized within churches because of differing belief systems. Now, I personally believe that to do that is to put very human constraints on an omnipotent God. Here is this energy, this being, this universe, however you view God. And we want to put these very human-like constraints on this God, giving it very human-like qualities that almost seem a little childlike in nature, you know, with some of the pettiness around it. You know, it's like nanny, nanny, boo, boo. You either believe me or else, or believe like me or else. And to think such a thing, you know, for one, it individualizes each one of us, right? It creates a them and it creates a us. It creates this very separate space. It separates us from each other. And as a result, we experience, as it says in our book, isolation and alienation. Now, I mentioned isolation last week because I remember it was last week where I talked about correctional systems where at one point they placed people in separate cells and they just isolated them from other people. And they were in these cells by themselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the effect was just the opposite of what they thought it would be. You know, it turns out that we actually need each other just a little bit. You know, and where's the joy when we feel this isolation and this alienation and this sense of separation from each other? I mean, ask most of us that felt isolated in our homes during the course of, you know, the main part of the pandemic last year. You know, a couple of weeks back, I was having a conversation with a couple of other people here at the church, and we were talking about spiritual teachings. And we began to talk about various things, and we found that we didn't all believe the same regarding a specific subject that we were talking about. But we respectfully listened to one another, and we respected each other, whether we agreed or not. You know, we held conversation and we listened with open ears and an open heart to each other and what each other had to say. It didn't matter whether we agreed with each other or not. We didn't have to agree with each other. What mattered was that we listened and that we respected one another. And we respected the beliefs of one another. So what if instead of trying to make someone else wrong because of the way that they believe, we instead agree to respect and to love each other despite those differences? Y'all know I'm a visual person, so I start thinking about different things. And I'm like, hey, not everybody likes strawberry ice cream. I love strawberry ice cream, but not everybody does. But should I go and tell everybody else that they're wrong as a result? Who in here doesn't like strawberry ice cream? Okay, you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. But there are so many different flavors out there, right? Of course, there's going to be instances where there are people that just aren't willing to listen. That's going to happen. We're going to run into people that just don't want to listen sometimes. And sometimes we may have to choose to remove ourselves from a situation, especially if it's an abusive situation. But our next chapter begins to delve into obstacles of joy, those things that are preventing us from allowing more joy into our lives or from allowing us to express the joy that we already are. But first, I think it's very important to acknowledge the human side of us. And that human side of us can take anything, and I mean anything, and create an obstacle to joy. Now I'm talking down to something as small as the debate within your head over which socks you're going to put on in the mornings. And I say this because is there anybody else in here? I'm going to veer completely off subject. Is there anybody else in this room or watching online that is a fan of The Big Bang Theory, that television show? Oh, y'all, come on. And I say this, thank you. I say this because I have on my Big Bang Theory socks this morning. For those of you who are Big Bang fans, they say Bazinga on them. Big Bang fans will get that, but anyway. But the Dalai Lama says that so much of our unhappiness originates within our own mind and heart and how we react to events in our life. And he gives the prescription for this, something he calls for mental immunity as being the prescription, which he further explains. He says, it is just learning to avoid the destructive emotions to develop the positive ones. First, we must understand the mind. There are so many different states of mind. And he says the diverse thoughts and emotions we experience on a daily basis. Some of these thoughts and emotions are harmful, even toxic, while others are healthy and healing. He says the former disturb our mind and cause much mental pain. The latter bring us true joyfulness. So it's kind of like getting a prescription, right? Not for something physical, but more for something mental. Or you may choose to look at it more as a protective shield instead of a prescription, if you wish. But imagine that you're walking into a game of paintball. Anybody in here that's ever played paintball knows that it hurts when you get hit with those things. I was hit right in the forehead once, believe me. It hurts. But imagine that before you walk into that game, you've got a suit of armor that you're putting on. You're likely going to walk out there. You're not going to be scared of anything. Those paintballs are going to be flying, but you're not going to worry. They're just going to hit the suit of armor, and you're going to be protected. You aren't going to fear physical pain, or you're not going to fear from being hit by one of those paintballs if you're wearing that suit of armor. Now, obviously, the thing with mental or emotional protection is that we can't simply just slip on a suit of armor, right? There's also not a magical pill that we can take that, as mentioned by the Dalai Lama, makes fear and anxiety go away and makes us immediately feel more peaceful. He says that's impossible. He goes on to say one must develop the mind over time and cultivate mental immunity. And he does mention that it takes time to develop. So yes, it's like some of those other things that we work hard to obtain, this mental immunity. It doesn't happen overnight. As much as I would like to stand here and tell you it does, it typically does not. It takes diligence, it takes willingness, and it takes time. Now, he said something else that really resonated with me. He said, the only thing I think is that people sometimes get quite annoyed with themselves unnecessarily, especially when they have thoughts and feelings that are really quite natural. Does anybody else find yourself getting annoyed with yourself when you're just having thoughts and feelings that are completely natural? You know, we acknowledge the fact that we're spiritual beings, but we're also living in this very human experience right now. So really, step one on building this mental immunity they speak of in this book, is acceptance. And that is acceptance of ourselves. Wherever we are in this journey of life right now, it is acceptance of ourselves. So I recently met this Unity minister by the name of Reverend Sharon Connors. And I'm just dropping a hint right now. Remember her name because one of her books may come up at one point. So anyway. But I met her both at the Fillmore Festival and at our regional retreat because she was the keynote speaker there. But she talked about this physical ailment that she had when she was much younger. She talked about how she was a runner, but she would often develop these wart-type things on her feet. And she said that they would be very painful and make it very difficult for her to run. She said she would go to the doctor, get them removed, and then lo and behold, they would come back. So she told us how she finally decided, she's like, you know what? I'm going to try some of this spiritual stuff. I'm going to really take the time to practice these spiritual principles and tools, and I'm going to start with mentally changing the way I feel about myself, the way that I accept myself. So she told us instead of focusing on how much pain her feet caused her or about how ugly these wart types of growths were, she decided to love her feet. She said she practiced very similar to how our co-founder Myrtle Fillmore practiced, and Myrtle used spiritual principles to cure herself from tuberculosis. She'd sit each day and she would picture Jesus sitting in a chair next to her, and she would tell herself, I am a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. And that's what Reverend Sharon did also. She meditated and she practiced love toward her feet. And she said she got the warts removed once more and they never came back. But first, she had to open herself up to principle and to all the possibilities, to all the potentiality that is out there. She had to open herself up to a willingness to see herself differently and to accept herself. Because although it cured a physical ailment, we know that's not where it started, right? It first started in here. In the physical, what happened physically with her feet was a manifestation of what started right first here, which also is known as faith. But acceptance of ourselves is how we first begin to build this mental immunity. Another way we begin to build this mental immunity is through what is mentioned in our book. They mention self-inquiry and realization. So I like to look at this as getting to know ourselves. For instance, I know when I'm hungry. And I know that if I wait too long, I'm going to get grouchy. I'm going to become a cross between hungry and angry. I'm going to become hangry. And I'm sure some others in this room become hangry, experience hangriness. But I know that I can prevent that if I pay attention to my body. If I listen to it and give it the nourishment it needs when it needs it. But first I have to become aware of the signs, right? This happens by getting to know myself. By being very present with myself and paying attention. And this isn't just always physically. It's also on an emotional or a mental level as well. I know when something is making me feel unhappy. I know when something is lowering my consciousness. I know when something is blocking my path to my joy. Not always, but I try. But we have to be willing to spend some time with ourselves and to get to know ourselves. When we do, we can, as our book states, soothe our emotional reactivity, leaving us less vulnerable to the destructive emotions and thought patterns that cause so much suffering. Those things that can act as obstacles to our joy. And lastly, I want to mention something in the book, and I hope I do not botch this word all up, but something called dukkha. Now, dukkha in the book is described as a few things, but there's one thing in our book I really wanted to focus on, one definition of it, where they define it as the stress and anxiety that arise from the attempt to control what is fundamentally impermanent and unable to be controlled. We try to control the moment, which results in our feeling that what is happening should not be happening. And they go on to say, so much of what causes heartache is wanting things to be different than they are. So, my mind automatically went to COVID with this one. While some of you in this room and watching online probably kicked up your feet and it's like, oh man, this is a time of rest and renewal. There were, what a wonderful break. Not everybody felt that way. Some people, myself, I kind of wavered a little bit off and on. Some of us were like, good grief, when is this going to be over already? Trying to control that situation of what was happening in that moment. But see, that's the difference in whether one chooses dukkha or the opposite of dukkha, which he describes as sukha, which is happiness, ease, and comfort. So I envision life often having two roads to choose from. I'm standing there and there's two roads in front of me. One is really bumpy, it's full of potholes and who knows what else. And the other one is just smooth as glass. When you're driving on a freshly paved road, how good that feels? Like, that fresh asphalt. And you're thinking, why in the world would I choose that bumpy road? That smooth one is right there in front of me. But that being said, I'm going to mention here also something you may or may not want to hear, but sometimes that bumpy road is inevitable. Sometimes you're going to have to take it because there's a stop you need to take along the way, and it's only found on that bumpy road. And unless you take that bumpy road, you're not going to be able to make that pit stop that your life so desperately needs for you to take. It doesn't mean that you still won't end up at the same destination had you taken the smooth road. It just means that the journey may seem a bit more challenging sometimes. But one thing we always have the choice is in how we handle that road, even when the road feels bumpy. Do we choose to concentrate and to focus on every single, perhaps uncontrollable bump in the road? Or do we instead just hang on and enjoy the ride? So today I want to give you an invitation. An invitation to learn to be very present with yourself and to not judge yourself, to go easy on yourself for the very human thoughts and feelings that you're likely experiencing in any given moment. To be willing and to be open to just listen, to truly listen to others, and to not be ready to agree or disagree with everything they say, but just to listen. And lastly, to know that sometimes you're going to take the bumpy road. And when you do, just strap on that seatbelt and get ready to have the time of your life. Namaste.